Hi guys and welcome to Boring History Story Relaxing. Tonight we slip quietly into a landscape that does not care whether you're tired, hopeful or brand new to the frontier. You arrive at dusk with the cold already testing you not dramatically, just persistently like a hand pressed against your back reminding you to keep moving. The wind skims low across the ground, carrying the smell of frozen grass and distant wood smoke, and you are standing in front of something that barely looks like a house at all. A shallow rise in the earth, a low doorway, a roof that seems to be part of the land rather than placed on it. You step down and in and the temperature shifts immediately. Not warm, not comfortable, just less cruel. This is your first night sleeping in an earth house during one of the coldest frontier winters, and you probably will not survive this without preparation. That is not meant to scare you. It is simply the quiet truth most settlers learned quickly, often the hard way. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. There is something comforting about knowing how far this story travels while you listen. Now dim the lights and let your eyes rest as the door closes behind you. Inside, the air smells different. Damp earth, old smoke, wool that never fully dries. The walls curve slightly inward, packed soil, reinforced with roots and rough timbers, holding the day's cold at bay, the way cupped hands hold water. A mainstream historical fact most textbooks agree on is that earth houses were widely used on the North American frontier, particularly on the Great Plains because timber was scarce and soil was abundant. That decision alone meant the difference between freezing and enduring. You stand still for a moment listening. The sound is not silence exactly. It is a muted hush, like the world has been wrapped in cloth. Wind still exists, but it passes over you now above the roof, its voice softened by layers of sod and frozen ground. When a gust hits hard, you feel it as pressure rather than noise, a slow push rather than a howl. Your breath fogs faintly in the low light. You exhale and watch it fade. The doorway is small on purpose. Heat does not escape as easily that way. You duck instinctively shoulders, rounding, already learning the posture this place demands. Frontier life has a way of shaping your body before you realize it. There is a fire pit near the center embers glowing like sleepy eyes. Someone tended it before you arrived. That matters. Fire here is not decoration. It is a living thing that requires attention or it disappears, and with it your safety. You feel the heat on your shins and hands, uneven and precious. The rest of the room remains cool, almost neutral, like the earth itself is holding its breath. A quirky tidbit settlers sometimes joked about was that earth houses felt more like burrows than homes, and a few even compared themselves to hibernating animals once winter truly set in. The comparison was not entirely wrong. Survival here depends on staying still, conserving energy, and trusting the ground to do what it has done for thousands of years. You lower yourself onto a rough bench, the wood cold through your clothes. The floor beneath your boots is packed dirt, swept but never truly clean. It gives slightly under pressure, forgiving in a way frozen boards are not. You feel grounded literally, as if the land has accepted your weight. Outside, night arrives fully. You know because the light fades, not because anything changes inside the house. Darkness here is thick and patient. Oil lamps flicker, casting long shadows that bend along the walls. Every object looks larger than it should, distorted by flame and fatigue. As you prepare for sleep, you begin to understand that rest on the frontier is not about comfort. It is about balance. Too much fire, and the air grows heavy and dangerous. Too little, and your breath will sting by morning. Most historians agree that managing indoor air in earth houses was a daily skill learned through trial error and the occasional close call. You stretch your fingers already stiff. Cold does not announce itself loudly. It seeps in slowly, starting at the edges, toes, nose, ears. You tuck your hands into your sleeves and remind yourself that people did this every night for months, sometimes years, not heroes, just families trying to make it to spring. There is a faint drip somewhere near the back wall. Meltwater from earlier warmth perhaps now slowing as the temperature drops again. Moisture is both friend and enemy here. The earth insulates, but it also holds dampness close. Historians still argue whether earth houses were healthier than log cabins in winter. Some point to steadier temperatures. Others note the persistent humidity and its effect on lungs and joints. There is no full agreement, only evidence and experience layered together like the walls around you. You lie down at last, bedding arranged carefully. Not luxuriously, carefully. Every fold matters, every gap is a place cold might settle. As your body lowers, you feel the earth beneath you solid and indifferent, yet somehow protective. The fire pops softly, a sound that makes your shoulders relax despite yourself. Your breathing slows. The house creaks once, not from wood, but from soil shifting as temperatures outside continue to fall. It is not a threatening sound, more like a reminder that you are sleeping inside something alive. Tomorrow will bring work cold and decisions that matter more than you want to think about right now. But tonight you are here, underground, wrapped in earth and quiet, learning the first lesson of frontier winter sleep. Survival begins with stillness. Your eyes close, the fire watches. You do not wake so much as drift closer to the surface of awareness the way a swimmer senses light above water before breaking through. The fire has dimmed, but it is still alive, and that matters. You can feel it without opening your eyes, a faint warmth touching your knees and the lower half of your body while your shoulders remain cool. The earth house has held through the night, and that alone feels like a small victory. When you finally sit up, joints protesting softly, you become more aware of how this place was made. The walls are not smooth. They carry the memory of hand shovels and patience. Earth houses on the frontier were not built so much as excavated. You dig down first, cutting into the ground until the wind no longer has a straight path to you. Then you shape, reinforce, and cover. A mainstream historical fact is that many frontier earth houses were dug several feet below ground level, specifically to escape wind exposure and stabilize indoor temperatures during extreme winters. You run your fingers along the wall beside you. The soil is firm, packed tight, mixed with roots and sometimes straw. Timber posts stand at intervals, their bark often left intact because stripping it took time settlers did not always have. These supports are not decorative. They are the bones of the house holding the roof while the earth presses in from all sides. Building like this changes how you think about shelter. Instead of fighting the land, you surrender to it a little. You let the ground wrap around you. That decision begins long before winter arrives. It starts in late summer or early fall when the soil is still workable and the clock is already ticking. People dug fast, knowing frost would soon lock the ground solid. A quirky detail often mentioned in frontier letters is that some families joked about living like badgers or prairie dogs, especially when neighbours visited and had to duck awkwardly through low entrances. Humour helped soften the strangeness of disappearing into the ground each night. It also helped mask the fear that came with trusting a roof made of sod and hope. The roof above you is layered carefully. First timbers laid side by side, then brush or straw to fill gaps. Then thick slabs of sod grass side down stacked like bricks. Once winter arrives, snow settles on top and becomes part of the insulation. You are not just under a roof, you're under a system. Historians still argue whether settlers fully understood the insulating physics behind this design or simply learned through observation and necessity. Either way, the result worked well enough to keep thousands alive. As you stand, you notice how the house feels smaller in daylight, even though very little light enters. Perhaps it is because now you're awake enough to notice every limitation. The ceiling is low. You cannot fully stretch without brushing beams. This is intentional. Warm air rises and smaller spaces are easier to heat. Comfort is sacrificed for survival without much ceremony. You step toward the doorway and feel the temperature change again. Even before opening it, cold presses inward waiting. The door itself is simple. Wood, if available, sometimes just a hide stretched over a frame. Air gaps are stuffed with rags grass. or whatever else can be spared. Perfection is not the goal, reduction is. Outside the world is blindingly bright with snow, but you do not step out yet. You pause, appreciating the thin boundary between livable and lethal. This house exists because someone took the time to dig instead of build up. That choice saved fuel every single night. Fuel is always on your mind, trees are distant, wood is precious. Digging into the earth costs sweat once, but pays dividends all winter. Most historians agree that earth houses significantly reduced firewood consumption compared to above-ground cabins. That difference could determine whether a family lasted until spring. Back inside, you crouch near the wall and notice small details left behind by builders. Finger marks, tool scratches. The earth remembers everything. Even now, frozen hard outside, it remains pliable enough inside to soften sound and hold heat. There is debate among scholars about how widespread earth house use truly was, especially compared to log structures. Some argue they were a stopgap solution abandoned as soon as lumber became accessible. Others point to decades-long use and even preference in certain regions. The truth likely sits somewhere in between, shaped by geography, resources, and stubborn personal taste. As the day begins, you understand something quietly important. Sleeping here is not an accident. It is the result of dozens of choices made months earlier, each one leaning towards survival rather than comfort. Digging deeper, lowering the roof, trusting the soil, you do not just sleep in an earth house, you commit to it. Tonight, when you lie down again, you will feel the ground differently, knowing how much effort went into making this small pocket of warmth possible. By the time evening circles back, you notice how the walls themselves seem to participate in the day. They're cooler now than they were at dawn, but not sharply so. Instead, the temperature changes slowly, politely, as if the house is easing you into night rather than shoving you toward it. You run your palm along the packed earth again and feel something steady beneath the surface, a kind of stored calm. These walls are not passive barriers. They work quietly, constantly. A mainstream historical factor often noted by architectural historians is that thick earthen walls function as thermal mass. They absorb heat when it is available and release it gradually as temperatures drop. You may not know the term, but you feel the effect in your bones. The warmth from last night's shower is still here, lingering faintly like a memory that has not quite faded. Log walls behave differently. They heat quickly and cool just as fast. Earth takes its time. It asks for patience in exchange for reliability. Settlers learnt this quickly, especially during cold snaps when the outside temperature plunged far below anything the body was meant to endure. Inside an earth house, those extremes were softened, rounded at the edges. The wall beside your bedding carries faint impressions where tools once struck, shovel marks, pressed seams where sod met soil. You imagine the rhythm of construction, the repeated lift and drop of earth, the steady pace needed to keep walls from collapsing before reinforcement. A quirky detail passed down in some frontier accounts mentions builders singing or counting aloud while packing earth, not for entertainment but to keep a consistent rhythm and density. You sit near the fire again, feeding it carefully. Too much wood and the walls will sweat. Too little and the room will chill by midnight. Moisture is always part of the equation. Earth walls breathe slowly, absorbing humidity and releasing it over time. That breathing can be comforting or dangerous depending on conditions. Historians still argue whether earth houses were more prone to damp-related illness than log cabins. Some researchers point to reports of coughs, joint pain and mold growth. Others note that steady temperatures reduce shock to the body and limited frostbite and hypothermia risk. Like most frontier debates, it rarely ends in certainty. It ends in trade-offs. As the fire settles, you hear a faint tick, not from wood, but from soil contracting as outside temperatures continue to drill. The sound is subtle, almost imagined, but it reminds you that the house is responding to the cold in real time. The walls tighten, holding heat closer, resisting the night. You notice how sound behaves here. Voices do not echo. Footsteps are dull. Even the fire seems quieter, its crackle softened by earth that absorbs vibration. This creates a strange intimacy. When someone speaks, the sound feels close, personal, impossible to ignore. Silence, too, becomes thicker, more complete. You lie back down and adjust your bedding. The wall beside you radiates a faint coolness that is not unpleasant. It is balanced by warmth from the fire and your own body heat. Together they meet somewhere in the middle. This is where sleep happens. Not in perfect warmth, but in equilibrium. There is an old observation recorded in several settler diaries that earth houses felt alive at night, shifting gently, breathing with the temperature. Some found this unsettling at first, others came to trust it. The land was not trying to crush them, it was doing what land does. As your breathing slows, you realize that the walls are teaching you something about endurance. They do not fight the cold directly. They accept it, absorb it, and respond slowly enough that it loses its sharpness. That lesson settles into you as surely as sleep does. Tomorrow the walls will warm again just slightly as the fire burns and bodies move within them. Tonight they hold steady, doing their quiet work while you rest. Night settles again, heavier than before, and you become acutely aware of what rests above your head. Not sky, not stars. Snow soil and timber layered together in quiet cooperation. The roof of the earth house does not announce itself loudly, but you feel its presence the way you feel deep water above you when swimming. There is weight there, and that weight brings a peculiar sense of safety. As the temperature drops, outside snow begins to accumulate. You do not hear it land. That is one of the strange comforts of sleeping under earth. Snowfall becomes an abstract idea rather than an event. No tapping on shingles, no wind clawing at boards, just pressure increasing slowly as flakes stack and settle. Many period accounts describe how settlers slept more soundly during snowstorms once they trusted their roofs, because snow acted as additional insulation rather than a threat. You sit up slightly and glance toward the ceiling. Thick beams run across it, darkened by smoke and time. Above them lies a layer of brush, then sod, then frozen ground. By morning, the roof may carry hundreds of pounds of snow. This is not poor construction. It is intentional design. Snow traps air, and trapped air slows heat loss. What seems dangerous from the outside becomes protective from within. Some settlers even waited for the first heavy snowfall before feeling truly secure for winter. A not an overlooked detail in frontier journals is the relief people expressed once snow covered their roofs completely. It meant fewer drafts. It meant steadier temperatures. It meant the house had entered its winter state. Still lying beneath all that mass can unsettle you if you think about it too much. The earth presses downward with quiet persistence. You learn quickly not to imagine collapse. Instead, you listen. The roof does not creak sharply. It does not groan like a ship in rough water. It responds slowly, adjusting to load and cold with muted sounds that fade almost as soon as you notice them. There is ongoing disagreement among historians about how often earthhouse roofs actually failed in winter. Some sources emphasize rare but catastrophic collapses due to poor drainage or rushed construction. Others argue that well-built earth houses were remarkably stable, especially once frozen solid. The truth likely depended on skill, timing and luck, all common currencies on the frontier. You lie back and pull your covering higher, feeling the cold settle around your shoulders. The roof above you now separates two worlds. Below it breath fogs and fades. Above it wind scours open land and snow piles into drifts that will not melt for months. The boundary is thin in distance but enormous in consequence. A small trick many families used involved shaping the roof with a slight slope almost imperceptible from inside to encourage melting snow to run off during brief warm spells. If water pooled and refroze, the added weight could become dangerous. This kind of practical knowledge spread quietly between neighbours, shared in passing rather than written down. You imagine standing outside tomorrow looking at the house from a distance. From that angle it barely rises above the ground, especially once snow blends it into the surrounding landscape. Travellers sometimes walked right past occupied earth houses without noticing them. There are recorded instances of people knocking on what they thought was a hill, only to have a door open at their feet. Inside, the darkness feels thicker tonight. The roof absorbs light as efficiently as it absorbs sound. Shadows cling close to the walls, and the fire's glow remains low and contained. This darkness encourages rest. There is nothing to look at for long. Your thoughts slow down, following the pace of the house itself. You shift slightly and notice how still the air is. Without tall walls or exposed surfaces, convection moves gently here. Warm air gathers near the ceiling, but the ceiling is close enough to share it back with you. The design does not waste effort. Everything is scaled to the human body and its limits. Some researchers have suggested that sleeping under heavy roofs affected how people dreamed. The enclosed feeling, the muffled soundscape, the absence of visual cues may have shaped sleep in subtle ways. There is no firm agreement on this, only speculation drawn from letters and later recollections. Still, you sense your own thoughts growing heavier, more grounded, as if gravity works differently here. A faint vibration passes through the roof as wind shifts direction above. You do not hear it so much as feel it, a gentle reminder that the world is active even while you remain still. The roof holds. It always has. You breathe in slowly, tasting smoke and earth. This roof is not something you built lightly. It represents hours of labour, careful placement, and trust in materials that do not forgive mistakes easily. Every night you sleep beneath it is a renewal of that trust. Eventually your awareness drifts away from weight and structure and returns to the simple fact of being warm enough. The roof above you becomes background. Snow continues to fall. The house settles deeper into winter, and you drift with it. Morning arrives quietly, not with light so much as with a subtle thinning of the dark. You sense it before you see it. The fire has faded to a dull red, and the air feels heavier, as if it has been holding still all night. This is the hour when light matters most, not for beauty, but for orientation. In an earth house, daylight is a scarce and carefully managed resource. You sit up and notice how the single opening admits the world in narrow portions. A small window, if there is one at all, is often set low and angled, designed to catch winter sun without inviting wind. Many frontier earth houses relied on little more than the doorway for natural light, a practical decision that reduced heat loss even as it deepened the interior gloom. Accounts from the period frequently note how people learned to read the quality of light rather than its quantity. You open the door just enough to let a blade of pale brightness slide across the floor. Snow reflects light efficiently, and even this small opening brightens the room more than you expect. The walls soften it instantly, shadows stretch and blur. Nothing here is sharp, the house does not allow it. By midwinter, darkness dominates daily life. The sun rises late and sets early, and when it does appear it travels low and brief across the sky. Settlers quickly learned to ration daylight the way they rationed fuel. Tasks requiring precision were done near the doorway or window. Everything else waited for firelight. Firelight is a different companion. It moves, it flickers, it lies. Objects appear closer or farther than they are. Faces seem older. Walls ripple slightly as flames shift. You become accustomed to judging space by memory rather than sight. This adaptation happens quietly without comment until you realize you can navigate the room almost entirely by feel. An interesting detail found in several homestead letters mentions that people developed a preference for certain lamps, not because they were brighter, but because their light felt calmer. Whale oil, tallow, and later kerosene each produced distinct colours and smells. These differences shaped mood as much as visibility. In winter, mood mattered. As night returns, the transition feels abrupt. Outside, the sky darkens quickly. Inside, nothing changes except your awareness of time slipping away. You add wood to the fire and watch the glow expand just enough to fill the space you need. Too much light invites wakefulness, too little encourages accidents. Balance again becomes the quiet rule. There is debate among historians about how frontier lighting affected sleep patterns. Some argue that prolonged darkness encouraged longer rest periods broken by wakeful intervals. Others suggest people slept lightly and irregularly, responding to fire maintenance, noise, or cold. What seems clear is that sleep here was flexible. It adapted to conditions rather than following strict hours. You settle back down as shadows reclaim the walls. The fire's glow paints the ceiling with slow-moving shapes. The roof feels closer at night, not physically but perceptually. Darkness compresses space. The house becomes a single shared volume of warmth and breath. Sound behaves differently now. Without visual cues, your ears take over. You hear the faint whisper of wind passing over snow above you, filtered through layers of earth. It sounds distant, almost polite. Occasionally ice cracks somewhere in the ground, a sharp report that fades quickly. These noises no longer startle you. They have become part of the house's voice. A small but telling habit developed in many households involved banking the fire carefully before sleep, shaping embers into a low mound that would last until morning without flaring dangerously. This required experience and attention. Too loose and the fire died. Too tight and it smothered itself. Mastering this was considered a mark of competence rather than comfort. You close your eyes and let the firelight dance behind them. The darkness inside the house feels different from the darkness outside. Outside darkness hides threats. Inside it protects you from them. This reversal takes time to accept. Once it does, the night becomes less intimidating. Your thoughts slow as the light fades further. There is nothing left to do but listen and breathe. The house does not demand attention now. It has absorbed the day's warmth and will release it gradually through the long hours ahead. Sleep arrives not as an event, but as a soft narrowing of awareness. The last thing you notice is how little light you actually need to feel safe. In this place, darkness is not the absence of life. It is part of how life survives. By the time you wake again, the smell greets you before any thought does. It is layered and familiar now, no longer sharp enough to demand attention. Damp soil beneath everything. Old smoke clinging to walls and clothing. Wool that has absorbed weeks of firelight and cold breath. This is what home smells like here, even if no one would ever describe it as pleasant. Smell carries information more reliably than sight in an earth house. You know whether the fire has gone too low by the way the air feels thin and cold in your nose. You know when moisture is building because the scent grows heavier, almost sweet like turned leaves. Many surviving accounts from frontier settlements note that people learn to read their environment through smell as much as temperature. Earth itself has a scent, especially when enclosed. It is not the clean smell of freshly dug soil, but something deeper and older. The walls hold it, releasing it slowly as humidity shifts. During winter, when ventilation is limited to preserve heat, that scent becomes constant. You stop noticing it consciously, but it never truly leaves. Smoke is the strongest presence. It settles into everything. Hair, bedding, skin, even food carries it faintly. Chimneys in earth houses were often short or improvised, sometimes nothing more than a flue angle through the roof. Smoke did not always escape cleanly. Period descriptions frequently mention eyes stinging and throats growing sore during long winters indoors. There is ongoing disagreement among researchers about how dangerous this constant smoke exposure was. Some point to respiratory complaints documented in letters and medical records. Others argue that low, steady smoke levels reduced insects and mold, offering unintended benefits. The balance between harm and protection remains unclear. A lesser-known habit involved intentionally allowing a thin haze of smoke to linger overnight. This was not neglect. It discouraged drafts and helped embers survive until morning. The smell of smoke in the morning air meant the fire had lived through the night. That smell brought relief. You shift on your bedding and inhale deeply without meaning to. Your body has accepted this environment. The scent no longer signals danger, it signals continuity. Another night passed, another morning arrived. Clothing plays a role here too. Garments worn daily become saturated with the house itself. When you step outside briefly, cold air strips away some of that smell, replacing it with sharp frost. Returning inside feels like sinking back into a familiar atmosphere, dense and enclosing. Food stored indoors takes on these qualities as well. Bread tastes faintly of smoke. Meat carries earth and fire together. This blending of flavours was not considered unpleasant. It was simply how winter tasted. Travellers from more established towns sometimes commented on it with surprise or discomfort, revealing how quickly the frontier reshaped expectations. There is evidence in household inventories that families place certain items near walls, specifically to dry them slowly using the earth's steady temperature to prevent rot. This practice required attention to smell. A sour note meant something was wrong. A neutral one meant all was well. As night approaches again, the air thickens slightly. You add wood to the fire and watch smoke curl upward, hugging the ceiling before finding its way out. The smell deepens, but it no longer bothers you. It reassures you. The house is alive. The fire is awake. Some scholars have suggested that this constant sensory immersion created a powerful emotional bond between people and their homes. The smell of earth and smoke became associated with survival itself. Leaving it behind could feel unsettling even when conditions improved elsewhere. You lie back down, breathing steadily. The air is not clean by modern standards. It is not meant to be. It is functional. It carries heat warning and memory. Each breath ties you more firmly to this place. As sleep returns, the scent fades into the background, no longer distinct. It becomes part of the quiet that holds you through the night, a reminder that survival here is not just seen or felt, but inhaled. The fire is smaller tonight, not by accident, but by instinct. You have learned its moods now, the way it responds to different wood, the way it sulks when starved and flares when overfed. Fire in an earth house is not a single event. It is a relationship, one that requires steady attention and quiet respect. You crouch close and nudge embers inward, coaxing them rather than commanding them. The heat brushes your face, unevenly warm on one cheek, cool on the other. Sparks do not fly here the way they do in open hearths. The walls swallow sound and motion alike. Everything feels contained, intentional. People living through frontier winters quickly understood that fire was not about dramatic flames. It was about continuity. A low, steady burn mattered more than brightness. Period household notes often reveal how families measured success, not by how hot the house became, but by whether the fire lasted until morning without being touched. Fuel scarcity shaped every decision. Trees were distant. Dung-twisted grasses and even dried corn stalks sometimes joined wood in the fire pit. These burned differently, slower and smokier, but they extended precious resources. There are scattered references to families experimenting with fuel mixtures until they found combinations that held overnight heat without suffocating the room. You notice how the fire sounds now, not crackling loudly but breathing. A soft hiss when a coal settles, a faint sigh when ash collapses inward. These sounds blend into the house itself, as much a part of it as the walls. You listen without thinking, the way one listens to rain when it is no longer a threat. Managing fire also means managing fear. Flames inside a structure made of wood and dried roots demand caution. Many settlers slept lightly, half alert to changes in smell or sound. A sudden flare could mean danger. A sudden silence could mean cold. That awareness never fully leaves you, even as your body rests. There are records of families developing small rituals around the fire before sleep. Not formal ceremonies, but habits repeated night after night, turning to a particular log, banking embers just so, saying nothing aloud but feeling satisfied when the fire looked right. These actions became muscle memory passed between hands without explanation. It remains uncertain how often fires caused accidents in earth houses compared to other frontier dwellings. Some accounts emphasize tragic losses. Others suggest that the contained nature of earth houses reduced risk by limiting airflow. The truth appears uneven, shaped by skill, fatigue and circumstance rather than design alone. You lie back and feel heat radiating unevenly across your legs. This asymmetry is familiar now. One side warms first, the other follows slowly. The walls help distribute what the fire gives, absorbing and releasing warmth with patience that humans rarely possess. As hours pass, the fire changes character. Flames retreat, coals glow deeper red, heat becomes gentler, more diffuse. This is the stage you trust most. It means the night is settling. It means the house has taken over. At some point you wake without knowing why. Perhaps the fire shifted. Perhaps the cold pressed a little harder against the walls. You listen. The fire still breathes. The house still holds. You adjust your covering slightly and let yourself sink back down. Firelight flickers faintly against the ceiling, tracing the beams overhead. Shadows barely move now. Everything has slowed to a shared rhythm. Your breathing matches it without effort. In this place, fire does not demand attention forever. It teaches you when to let go. As sleep deepens, you trust that the embers will last, that the walls will respond, that morning will come quietly again. The fire keeps watch. You rest. When you lower yourself to sleep tonight, the ground feels closer than ever. Not hostile, just present. Sleeping on the earth is not the same as sleeping above it. The difference announces itself slowly through pressure points, through temperature, through the way your body learns where to give in and where to hold firm. Your bedding is a careful construction. Nothing soft exists here without intention. A layer of straw first goes dry if you were lucky enough to prepare it before the snow came. Then blankets are often more worn than warm, folded and refolded, until thickness matters more than appearance. Sometimes a hide lies beneath everything, not for comfort but to block moisture rising from the soil. Accounts from wintering families consistently describe how important insulation beneath the body was. Heat rises, but cold seeps upward relentlessly. Settlers who ignored this learned quickly, waking stiff, chilled and aching despite heavy coverings on top. The ground takes heat patiently, never rushing, never giving it back unless forced to. You lie on your side knees, drawn slightly toward your chest. This position becomes natural in cold spaces. It conserves warmth without conscious effort. You tuck your hands, close fingers curled into sleeves or pressed between layers. Every part of you learns to stay small. The floor beneath you is not frozen solid, but it is firm. Packed earth holds the day's warmth longer than open ground, yet it remains cool enough to remind you where you are. There is something humbling about that contact. No mattress separates you from the land. You sleep on what sustains you and threatens you in equal measure. An odd detail mentioned in several frontier recollections describes people sleeping with their boots near their hips or shoulders rather than their feet. This kept leather flexible and prevented ice from forming inside them overnight. Comfort sacrificed again, but tomorrow mattered more than tonight. You adjust your bedding and feel how weight distributes differently here. The earth does not bounce or yield much. It supports without responding. Your body adapts muscles, relaxing unevenly, learning to rest despite firmness. Sleep arrives not because you are comfortable, but because exhaustion outweighs complaint. There is disagreement among historians about how much chronic pain resulted from years of sleeping on the ground. Some sources describe aching joints and stiff backs. Others suggest that constant physical labour kept bodies strong enough to compensate. The records are mixed, shaped by memory age and what people chose to write down. What feels most different is the temperature along your spine. Cold creeps upward from below if you misjudge your layers. You shift, add a fold, tuck a corner tighter. These movements become small and practiced, done half asleep. Your body learns faster than your mind. The walls nearby radiate a faint steadiness. Not warmth exactly, but moderation. They slow the night's advance, buying time for your fire and your coverings to do their work. You press your shoulder closer to the wall without thinking. Feels slightly cooler than your body, slightly warmer than the air. Children often slept closest to the walls or between adults, not out of sentiment but efficiency. Shared heat mattered. Space was arranged by physics rather than preference. This closeness shaped sleep habits that felt normal here and strange anywhere else. As the night deepens, you wake briefly to shift again. Your hip aches where it presses the ground. You roll carefully, mindful of embers and space. The earth does not forgive sudden movement. You settle and breathe until discomfort dulls into background sensation. There are moments lying here when you imagine sleeping above ground in a raised bed, wrapped in quilts, insulated from soil and damp. The thought feels distant, almost unreal. Comfort becomes abstract when survival is immediate, yet there is something grounding about this way of sleeping. Literally grounding. Your body remains aware of gravity, of contact, of weight. Dreams feel heavier, slower. They do not float far. They stay close to the body, close to the house. Some later observers speculated that this closeness to the ground affected how people perceived their place in the world. There is no clear agreement on that, dear, only suggestion. But lying here, you feel less separate from the landscape than you ever did elsewhere. Eventually, discomfort fades into familiarity. Your body finds a truce with the earth. Breathing slows, thoughts loosen. The ground remains firm, unchanging, while you drift somewhere softer. Sleep takes you not gently, but thoroughly. The earth holds you in place as the night passes overhead unnoticed, unheard, unable to reach you here. You wake to your own breath, sounding louder than it should. Each inhale feels sharper, each exhale visible, even in the dim interior. The air has changed overnight. It carries cold more openly now, no longer softened by yesterday's warmth. This is what happens when temperatures fall hard after sunset. The house holds on, but even it has limits. You sit up slowly and notice a faint shimmer along the walls. At first it looks like dust catching firelight. Then you realize it is frost. Not thick, not dramatic, just a thin lace clinging to the coldest surfaces. Corners, the low edges of the wall, places where air circulation is weakest. The sight feels unsettling and oddly impressive at the same time. Many winter diaries describe waking to ice inside the house without panic. It was expected during deep cold spells. Moisture from breath and cooking rose cooled and settled where it could. The presence of frost indoors did not mean failure. It meant the night had been severe. You rub your hands together and bring them close to your mouth, breathing warmth into stiff fingers. Condensation clouds briefly then disappears. Every breath adds a little more moisture to the air. Every breath also reminds you that oxygen here must be managed. Too much sealing and the air grows stale. Too much ventilation and warmth escapes. The balance is delicate. Earth houses did not have modern chimneys or vents. Air exchange happened through cracks, doors, and whatever improvised flues existed. People learned to read air quality by feel. Headaches, dizziness, burning eyes. These were warnings, not inconveniences. There is disagreement among scholars about how often poor ventilation caused serious harm in these homes. Some medical records hint at chronic respiratory issues. Others suggest that constant low-level airflow prevented the worst outcomes. What is clear is that people paid close attention to how the air felt, even if they did not name the reasons. You stand and stretch carefully, joints protesting in the cold. The frost along the wall glitters faintly, then melts where your body heat comes close. Water beads and slowly disappears into the earth. Nothing here stays static for long. Children used to leave handprints in frost just for the pleasure of watching them fade. It was a small amusement in a season short on novelty. Adults rarely commented, but they noticed. It meant the house was breathing cycling moisture instead of trapping it dangerously. The fire needs attention now. You coax it back to life, watching flames lick at coals reluctantly at first, then with growing confidence. As heat spreads, the frost retreats. Not instantly, gradually, the walls absorb warmth, releasing yesterday's cold with reluctance. You notice how sound returns with heat. As ice melts, tiny drips form. Somewhere near the back wall, water taps softly into soil. The house shifts again, responding to change. This responsiveness becomes reassuring. It means the system still works. Sleeping through cold like this teaches patience. You do not expect the house to stay warm all night. You expect it to slow loss to soften extremes. That expectation changes how you experience discomfort. Cold becomes temporary rather than threatening. There are accounts of settlers comparing these mornings to waking inside a cave. Cool, damp, protected. The comparison fits. Caves have sheltered humans for far longer than houses. Earth houses tap into something older than frontier ingenuity. As the room warms slightly, your breath becomes less visible. The air grows heavier, easier. You feel it in your chest first. The tension eases. Another night survived. You sit back down and let the fire settle. The frost is gone now, absorbed back into walls and floor. Evidence erased, but memory remains. Tonight may bring the same challenge, or worse. For now you breathe steadily, grateful for walls that allowed ice to appear without allowing you to freeze. The earth has done its work again imperfectly, but well enough. You notice it most clearly when you shift in the night. Your clothes move with you, but they also stay behind in subtle ways, catching on, bedding pressing into joints, folding and unfolding like part of the room itself. Here clothing is not something you take off at the end of the day. It becomes part of the structure that keeps you alive. Layers matter more than garments. A shirt is not a shirt, it is a surface, a boundary. Wool against skin holds warmth even when damp, and that property alone made it invaluable during frontier winters. People learnt this quickly, sometimes too late after experimenting with cotton or linen that felt fine until it trapped cold instead of heat. Over time, experience taught a simple rule. What you wear to sleep is as important as the walls around you. You tug a sleeve down over your hand and feel how fabric softens the cold air before it reaches skin. Sleeves become gloves, collars become scarves. Hems are tucked beneath hips or folded over feet. You reshape yourself into something insulated, almost architectural. The house holds you. Your clothes hold you inside it. Frontier households often owned very few winter garments, sometimes only one set per person suitable for deep cold. That meant sleeping in them, mending them by firelight, drying them slowly against earth walls. Clothing rarely rested. It worked day and night. Letters from the period mention people sleeping stiffly in layered wool, then waking already dressed for labour-saving precious minutes and warmth at dawn. There is a small habit that appears again and again in recollections usually mentioned without emphasis. People slept with tomorrow's clothes inside their bedding. Stockings, shirts, even boots sometimes placed near the body so they would not freeze solid overnight. Pulling on ice-cold garments in the morning could steal more heat than the fire could replace quickly. You roll slightly and feel seams press into your shoulder. Comfort is secondary, protection comes first. Over time, your body stops complaining as loudly. It learns which pressure points will ache and which will fade. Sleep adapts to constraint. Clothing also absorbs the house itself. Smoke settles into fibres. Earth dust clings to hems. Even the smell of fire becomes part of the fabric. When you step outside, briefly cold air strips some of that away, but returning inside restores it quickly. You carry the house with you, stitched into what you wear. There has never been complete agreement among later observers about how restrictive this constant layering felt to people at the time. Some writings describe frustration, itching, and heaviness. Others suggest that once habits formed, the sensation disappeared into normality. What remains consistent is how rarely people removed layers entirely during winter, even indoors. You lie still and feel how clothing traps pockets of warm air close to skin. Those pockets are fragile. A careless movement can release them. You learn to move slowly, deliberately preserving what you have built. Sleep itself becomes a kind of stillness practice. Children were often wrapped more heavily than adults, sometimes bundled until only faces showed. This was not indulgence. It was necessity. Smaller bodies lose heat faster. Mothers checked layers by touch rather than sight, sliding hands beneath blankets to feel where the warmth lingered, where it should. As the fire dims, you adjust again, pulling fabric closer, tightening the seal around wrists and ankles. Your clothes and bedding overlap, now indistinguishable in function. Together they form a flexible shell inside the rigid one provided by the house. Some later commentators romanticized frontier clothing as rugged and freeing. The reality was narrower. Clothing constrained movement and demanded constant maintenance. But at night, when the cold pressed hardest, those same constraints offered reassurance. You were wrapped. You were contained. Breathing slows. The scratch of wool against skin fades into background sensation. The house, the fire, the walls, and what you wear all perform the same task from different angles. They slow loss. They buy time. You drift towards sleep with sleeves pulled low and knees tucked in. dressed not for rest, but for endurance. Outside winter continues its work. Inside layers hold. As the night deepens, sound begins to matter in new ways. You notice it not because there is more of it, but because there is so little. The earth house absorbs noise the way snow absorbs light. What remains feels intentional, as if every sound has passed a test before reaching you. Wind moves across the prairie above your head, but you do not hear it howl. Instead, you sense it as pressure, a slow push that travels through soil and timber before reaching your ears as a low, distant murmur. It is less a sound than a presence. The house translates the chaos of weather into something manageable. Inside, even small noises feel close. A sleeve brushing bedding, a log settling in the fire, your own breathing steady and surprisingly loud. The walls hold these sounds gently, keeping them from scattering. When someone shifts nearby, you know it immediately, not because it is disruptive, but because it is intimate. People who wrote about winter nights underground often remarked on this closeness without quite knowing how to describe it. The house does not echo, it does not amplify. It concentrates. Every movement feels shared even when no words are spoken. There is a faint creak above you as the roof responds to cold. Not a sharp complaint, but a slow adjustment. Timber tightens, sod stiffens, snow settles again. These sounds repeat throughout the night, spaced far enough apart that they never become alarming. They simply confirm that the house is still responding. You become aware of how quiet your own movements have grown. You shift carefully, mindful of how sound carries in this space. Loud gestures feel unnecessary, almost rude. The house encourages restraint. Over time, people learn to move softly indoors, conserving energy and respecting shared rest. An odd observation appears in a few personal letters, where settlers mention missing sound when they moved into larger wooden homes later on. The openness, the echo, the distance between walls felt unsettling after years spent in rooms that listened so closely. Outside, sounds occasionally break through. A distant animal, ice cracking somewhere in the ground. These noises arrive muffled, softened by layers of earth. You hear them without urgency. Predators and storms exist out there, but they feel removed, as if happening in another world entirely. There is no single explanation agreed upon for why earth houses dampen sound so effectively. Some attribute it to mass and density. Others point to irregular surfaces that scatter vibration. Whatever the reason, the result is a nighttime environment that encourages sleep by removing surprise. You lie still and listen to the fire. It no longer crackles. It hums softly, a low sound that blends into the background. This sound becomes your reference point. As long as it continues, everything else feels stable. Silence settles fully now. Not empty calmness, but a thick one filled with small, predictable noises. You stop cataloguing them. They fade into a single, steady atmosphere. Your mind follows, releasing its need to monitor. Breathing slows. Muscles loosen. The house has done what it does best. It has taken the wild, noisy world above and turned it into something quiet enough for rest. You drift off, accompanied by nothing more than earth fire, and your own breath all moving together in the dark. You feel the difference before you think about it. The warmth tonight is not coming from one place. It is distributed, shared, layered the way everything else is here. Bodies lie closer together than they would in other circumstances, not out of affection exactly, but out of understanding. Heat moves from skin to skin more efficiently than it moves through air. In winter earth houses, sleeping arrangements followed physics more than preference. Adults and children gathered into clusters that shifted subtly over the season. The smallest were placed where warmth lingered longest. The largest were positioned where their mass could shield others from drafts. Over time, these patterns settled into routine rarely questioned. You notice how breathing overlaps in the dark. Not loud enough to disturb, just present. A slow rhythm of inhales and exhales rising and falling at slightly different intervals. This shared sound becomes comforting. It tells you that others are warm enough to sleep. It tells you that you are not alone in holding back the cold. Historical household sketches and personal accounts suggest that privacy was a luxury rarely expected in winter quarters. Space contracted as temperatures fell. What might have been individual sleeping spots in warmer months merged into shared bedding when the ground froze hard. This was not considered hardship. It was efficiency. You are just slightly careful not to disturb the balance. Someone's elbow rests against your side. Another body presses warmth through blankets and layers of wool. The heat is uneven but persistent. Cold finds fewer pathways when bodies overlap. There is a small, easily missed detail that appears in recollections from the period. People often slept with heads alternating directions. This arrangement reduced crowding at shoulders and allowed breath to disperse more evenly. It also minimized the feeling of being watched even in the dark. Practical quiet unspoken, you become aware of how still everyone is. Movement wastes warmth. Over time, bodies learn to remain calm through the night, shifting only when absolutely necessary. Sleep deepens faster in these conditions. The effort of holding heat together creates a shared fatigue that pulls everyone downward at once. Later observers sometimes struggled to understand how families tolerated such closeness. Some imagined it as uncomfortable or emotionally strained. Those impressions rarely align with first-hand descriptions. What comes through instead is a sense of normalcy. Warmth mattered. The rest adjusted around it. Children often fell asleep first, their breathing deep and unguarded. Adults followed more slowly, listening for a while longer, making sure the fire was steady, the door sealed the night behaving as expected. Only then did they let themselves rest fully. You feel a subtle shift as someone nearby turns redistributing blankets. The temperature changes slightly, then stabilizes again. These micro-adjustments happen throughout the night, rarely remembered in the morning. They are part of the house's internal life. There is no clear agreement among later writers about how much these shared sleeping arrangements affected emotional bonds. Some suggest they strengthened family cohesion. Others caution against reading too much into survival behavior. What remains clear is that closeness here served a purpose that went beyond comfort. It made sleep possible. As the fire-dim shared heat becomes even more important, you sense the room cooling at the edges first. The center holds longer, bodies respond by drawing closer without waking fully. Blankets are pulled tighter, knees tuck in. The group contracts slightly, conserving what it has built. You drift in and out of light sleep, aware of warmth, shifting breath, brushing. Fabric, the faint sound of someone exhaling near your ear. None of it startles you anymore. It has become part of the night's texture. There is something ancient about this arrangement. Long before houses were built up from the ground, people slept like this for the same reason. Heat shared is heat saved. The Earth House does not invent the practice. It simply makes it necessary again. Eventually individual awareness fades. The group becomes background. Your body relaxes into the collective warmth, trusting it to hold through the remaining hours. Outside winter presses down. Inside heat circulates quietly from one body to the next. Sleep deepens, carried not by silence alone, but by shared presence. The house holds you all together, breathing slowly, waiting for morning. By the time sleep approaches, you notice hunger in a different way than you did before winter set in. It is not sharp. It does not demand. It settles low in your body, reminding you that warmth begins long before bedding and fire. What you eat before sleep matters almost as much as where you sleep. Evening meals here are deliberate, not large for pleasure but dense enough to last. Fat becomes important, salt matters. Warm food does more than fill the stomach. It radiates outward, buying hours of internal heat while the fire slowly fades. People learn this without charts or measurements. They felt it in how long their fingers stayed warm, how deeply they slept. You remember the taste lingering now as you lie down. Thick broth. Bread hardened by cold but softened in liquid. Sometimes meat, sometimes not. Meals shifted with supply, but the goal stayed the same. go to sleep with something burning inside you. This knowledge passed quietly between households, reinforced every time someone skipped dinner and paid for it before dawn. Cooking in an earth house added to the atmosphere. Steam rose carrying food scents that mixed with smoke and soil. That moisture warmed the air briefly, then settled into walls and bedding. Winter cooking was not just nourishment, it was climate control, temporary and imperfect. A small detail appears in winter journals where people mention saving the warmest portion of a meal for a last eating slowly near the fire so heat could build before rest. Children were encouraged to finish every bite not for discipline but because empty stomachs meant cold nights. Some later commentators tried to calculate calorie needs from surviving rationalists, but those numbers rarely tell the full story. Bodies respond differently under strain. What mattered more than totals was timing. Eating late helped sleep come easier. Eating poorly made the night feel longer. You shift slightly and feel warmth still lingering in your core. It spreads outward slowly, meeting the cooler air halfway. This internal heat becomes part of the system, another layer working alongside walls and blankets. There is no single explanation agreed upon for how frontier diets affected winter survival. Some argue that high-fat intake protected against cold stress. Others note deficiencies that likely weakened immune systems. The records offer fragments rather than answers. What remains clear is that people adjusted their eating to the season, with intention even if they lacked language to explain why. You remember someone once mentioning that hunger dreams were common during winter. Food appearing vividly, almost painfully real. Perhaps that came from scarcity. Perhaps from how closely eating and sleeping were linked. Either way, meals shape the night as much as the day. As the fire settles, your stomach works quietly, producing warmth without noise. This is the most reliable heat you have. It does not flicker. It does not drift upward. It stays with you steady and personal. You breathe slowly, feeling heaviness behind your ribs, not discomfort, just fullness. The body likes this state before rest. Muscles loosen more willingly, thoughts wander less. Outside, the cold remains absolute. Inside, digestion continues unseen but effective. You drift deeper into sleep, carried partly by what you ate hours earlier. The house holds, the fire fades. Your body keeps working through the night, turning food into warmth, while the earth keeps winter at a distance. You become aware of them mostly by smell and sound, before sight ever enters the picture. A warm animal presence close by, breathing deeper and slower than yours. In winter, the line between human space and animal space softens not out of sentiment but practicality. Heat is heat, regardless of where it comes from. Livestock are not guests here. They are part of the system. In many frontier earth houses, animals were kept in adjoining spaces or separated by little more than a low wall or packed earth barrier. Sometimes they shared the same roof. The arrangement was never accidental. Body heat from animals helped stabilize indoor temperatures, especially on the coldest nights. You hear a slow shuffle, the sound of weight shifting on straw. Quiet snort. The smell of hay and manure mixes with earth and smoke. It is not pleasant, but it is familiar, and familiarity matters more than comfort now. Cold has a way of lowering standards quickly. People who lived this way rarely wrote about it at length. Perhaps because it felt too ordinary to explain. But when visitors from towns encountered it for the first time, their reactions were often sharp. Surprise, discomfort, even disbelief. For those already settled here, it was simply another layer of insulation. There is a small detail that shows up in a few personal recollections. Animals were positioned carefully at night, not randomly. Larger bodies were placed where drafts were strongest. Smaller animals were kept closer to human sleeping areas, not for companionship but efficiency. Warmth was directed where it was needed most. You shift slightly and hear a faint answering movement from the other side of the wall. The sound reassures you. It means the animal is alive, warm and breathing. That matters. Animals that survived the night meant food labour and continued warmth tomorrow. Later readers have never fully settled on how healthy this arrangement was. Some descriptions mention increased illness. Others suggest that constant warmth and reduced exposure to extreme cold offset those risks. The truth likely varied with cleanliness, ventilation, and sheer necessity. You notice how sound behaves differently when animals are nearby. Their breathing adds a low rhythm beneath everything else. Their movements are predictable, slow, rarely startling. This steadiness becomes part of the night's background, something you notice only when it stops. Children often slept closest to these shared walls, though not by choice. Space was allocated by need. Parents listened carefully through the night, attuned to changes in sound that might signal distress or danger. Even half-asleep responsibility did not fully loosen its grip. The smell grows stronger as the night deepens and ventilation tightens. You adjust without waking, fully pulling fabric closer to your face, breathing through layers that filter air slightly. The body adapts even to this, prioritizing warmth over freshness. Some observers later romanticize these arrangements as symbols of closeness to nature. That interpretation misses the point. This was not philosophy, it was arithmetic. One warm body plus another equals less fuel burned. That simple math shaped countless nights. You feel warmth seep through the wall, faint but noticeable. It pools near the floor first, then rises slowly. Combined with the fire and shared human heat, it creates a pocket where sleep becomes possible. As hours pass, animal sounds fade into stillness. Rest spreads through the space evenly. The house becomes a shared shelter in the most literal sense. Humans and animals breathing together, holding back winter through proximity. Your awareness drifts comforted by the low, steady presence nearby. The night continues, supported by every warm body under the roof, human or otherwise. The damp makes itself known slowly, not as water you can point to, but as a feeling that settles into joints and lungs without asking permission. You notice it when you breathe deeply and your chest feels heavier than it should. You notice it when your knees ache, even though you have not worked them yet today. The earth gives warmth generously, but it also holds moisture close. Living underground changes how illness feels. Coughs linger longer. Congestion comes and goes with the fire's strength. A cold that might pass quickly elsewhere can settle in and refuse to leave. People did not need doctors to notice the pattern. They felt it in their bodies as winter stretched on. Records from frontier settlements often mention sickness in passing folded into daily life, rather than highlighted as tragedy. A fever here, a persistent cough there. Illness was expected, managed, endured. Rest was limited. Survival did not pause simply because someone felt unwell. You sit up, slowly stretching stiffness from your back. The air feels thick this morning, carrying yesterday's moisture. The walls have absorbed it overnight. As the fire wakes again, some of that dampness will release, drifting into the room before finding a way out. This cycle repeats daily, unseen but constant. There is a quiet uncertainty that follows these conditions. People wondered, without quite framing it, whether living so close to Earth weakened them or protected them. Some believed the steady temperatures kept bodies from shock. Others suspected the damp invited sickness. No clear answer ever settled the matter, even later when researchers look back through journals and medical notes trying to trace patterns. You cough once, softly, more reflex than warning. The sound feels loud in the quiet room. Someone stirs nearby. A hand reaches out briefly, checking your forehead by touch, warm enough. That is often the only measure available. Small preventative habits developed over time. Bedding aired near the doorway when weather allowed. Walls scraped lightly to remove mould when it appeared. Fires burned hotter on certain days to dry the room, even if it meant using more fuel. These actions were not labelled as health measures. They were simply adjustments that made life more bearable. An interesting aside appears in a few letters where people mention craving fresh air almost painfully by late winter. Stepping outside even briefly brought relief that felt physical, not emotional. Cold air cleared lungs and sharpened senses. Returning inside meant trading that clarity for safety again. Children bore illness differently. They adapted faster but weakened faster too. Fevers were watched closely. Warmth was added or removed with careful hands. Parents slept lightly, alert to changes in breathing that might signal danger. Night rest was never entirely surrendered when sickness hovered. There are accounts of people relocating sleeping spots within the house depending on health. Someone coughing heavily might move closer to the doorway for fresher air. Someone feverish might be placed nearer the fire. The house became a flexible space reorganized according to need rather than habit. Later commentators often struggled to interpret these practices through modern medical lenses. Some saw neglect, others saw ingenuity constrained by circumstance. What remains clear is that people worked with what they had guided by observation more than theory. You lie back down, pulling fabric closer as the fire gains strength. Warmth eases the tightness in your chest. Moisture retreats slightly, driven upward and outward. Relief arrives in small increments, not as cure, but as comfort. The earth house does not heal you. It shelters you while your body does what it can. That distinction matters. Survival here depends on endurance rather than recovery. As the day unfolds, you move carefully, conserving energy. Illness slows everything, but it does not stop the rhythm. Fire must be fed. Animals must be checked. Food must be prepared. The night will come again regardless. When sleep returns later, it carries with it the dull ache of joints and the heaviness of damp air. You accept both without comment. Complaints change nothing. Adaptation changes everything. Breathing steadies. The house settles. Illness becomes another condition to navigate, folded into the long winter night alongside cold and darkness. You rest where you can, trusting that morning will bring at least a small shift in your favour. Night work does not announce itself. It begins after the fire has been adjusted and after everyone appears settled. You think the house has gone quiet, but then you notice movement that does not belong to rest. Someone rises, carefully testing the floor with bare feet, moving in a way that avoids sound. This work happens when warmth must be protected and time feels suspended. Much of this labour falls to women, not because it was named that way, but because roles formed around endurance and repetition. After dark hands mend clothing by firelight fingers, knowing stitches by memory, tears in wool are closed before they widen. Seams are reinforced where wear always begins. These small acts determine how warm tomorrow will feel. You lie still and listen. The soft rasp of thread through fabric. The quiet tap of a needle against a thimble. These sounds blend with the fire's breathing. They are part of the night's rhythm, steady and unhurried. No one speaks. Words would waste warmth and concentration. In winter, nothing waits for the daylight if it can be done now. Water must be checked so it does not freeze solid. Food must be turned or covered so damp does not take hold. Ashes are shifted to keep embers alive. These tasks are done slowly, deliberately, without ceremony. There are hints in personal writings that this nighttime labour carried a particular weight. It was invisible work rarely mentioned, unless it failed. When clothing held and fires lasted, no one commented. When they did not, consequences arrived quickly. The absence of praise did not lessen the importance. You sense a presence near the fire, a body positioned just close enough to feel heat without drawing too much. A pot is nudged, a lid adjusted. Someone warms hands briefly, then returns to work. The light flickers shadows moving across walls that have seen this routine countless times. Children sometimes woke during these hours and watched silently, learning, without instruction, how to move without noise, how to judge fire by colour rather than flame, how to recognise when the house needed attention even while it slept. These lessons were not taught formally, they were absorbed. Later observers struggled to account for how much of frontier survival depended on this quiet labour. It rarely appeared in official records or inventories. Yet the evidence sits in what endured. Clothing that lasted multiple winters, fires that rarely failed, homes that held through long nights. You feel the air shift slightly as the door is cracked open just enough to refresh the room. Cold presses inward, sharp and brief, then the door closes again. The change wakes you halfway but not fully. You trust the timing. You trust the hands managing it. There is no settled explanation for how people sustained themselves on such fragmented rest. Some accounts suggest exhaustion layered upon itself until the body adjusted. Others hint that sleep came in waves deeper for having been interrupted. What is clear is that rest here was shared, negotiated, and flexible. You drift closer to sleep, again aware of movement continuing nearby. The work does not hurry. It does not resent the night. It uses it. Darkness offers fewer distractions, firelight narrows focus, tasks feel contained within a small manageable world. A sleeve is hung near the wall to dry slowly. Boots are repositioned closer to warmth. A blanket is pulled higher over a sleeping form. These gestures are quiet forms of care offered without acknowledgement. By morning, their effects will be felt rather than seen. You notice how the house responds to this activity. Heat redistributes. Air circulates gently. The system adjusts without complaint. The earth absorbs sound and motion, allowing work to happen without disturbing rest more than necessary. At some point the movement slows. Tools are set aside. The fire is checked one last time. Hands hover briefly, reading heat the way one reads weather. Satisfied, the worker settles back down, folding into the shared warmth, as if they had never left. Sleep deepens again. The night continues, supported by labour that leaves no trace except survival itself. Tomorrow no one will mention what was done. There will be no marker of effort. But the house will be warmer, clothing will hold, the fire will last. You breathe evenly, unaware now of how much has been managed while you rested. The earth house remains steady, held together not only by soil and timber but by attention offered in the dark. Children experience the cold differently. You notice it in how they sleep first and wake last, how their breathing deepens quickly once warmth settles around them. Smaller bodies lose heat faster, but they also seem to adapt faster, finding comfort in routines adults still think about consciously. At night, children are arranged with care. Not ceremonially, just precisely. Someone always makes sure a small back is pressed toward a warmer body, that feet are tucked in, rather than left to wander into cold air. Blankets are adjusted until no skin shows. This is not indulgence. It is calculation learned through observation and loss. You remember how children here fall asleep fully dressed, often still holding something from the day, a scrap of cloth, a wooden toy smoothed by many hands. These objects are not for play now. They are anchors, familiar shapes that help small minds settle in an environment that offers little softness. Cold teaches children early. They learn not to kick blankets away. They learn to curl inward without instruction. They learn which parts of the house feel safest and which corners stay colder no matter what. These lessons come quietly absorbed without explanation. There are winter accounts that mention children waking with frost in their hair or eyelashes, not with alarm but curiosity. The sensation becomes part of memory rather than trauma. Adults notice, brush it away, adjust layers and move on. Panic would only waste heat. Illness worries everyone more when it comes to the young. A child's cough sounds louder in the night, sharper against the silence. Parents listen closely, counting breaths without counting aloud. A warm hand rests on a forehead longer than necessary, memorizing temperature, so changes will be noticed later. Some families rotated sleeping positions when a child seemed restless or unwell. Near the fire for a while, then closer to the door for fresher air. These decisions were not discussed. They were felt. Experience guided them more reliably than advice ever could. You lie still and sense a child shift nearby, a small sigh escaping as they settle deeper into sleep. Their body radiates warmth surprisingly strong for its size. That warmth contributes more than it takes. Shared heat flows in all directions. Children also adapt emotionally. Fear of darkness fades when darkness is always present. Silence becomes normal. The house itself feels like a living thing they accept without question. While adults sometimes imagine collapse or danger, children simply trust what has already held them through many nights. Later recollections often note how children who grew up in earth houses slept soundly in conditions others found unbearable. This was not toughness in the dramatic sense. It was familiarity. The body learns what is normal and stops resisting it. Dreams come differently to children here. They are shaped by closeness and repetition. The house, the fire, the shared breathing all form the background of sleep. Later in life, some describe dreaming of small enclosed spaces not as confinement but as safety. You notice how children rarely complain about the ground or the darkness. They accept both quickly. What unsettles them more is change. A door left open too long, a fire burning differently than usual. Stability matters more than comfort. As the night wears on, adults wake and adjust things quietly, but children often sleep through these movements entirely. Their trust runs deeper. It is built not on understanding but on consistency. Morning arrives gradually and children stir slowly, reluctant to leave shared warmth. Someone lifts a blanket, lets in a thin slice of colder air. Small bodies protest softly, then adapt again as they always do. You watch this and understand something important. Survival here is learned young not through instruction but through nights like this. Children do not remember being taught how to sleep in the cold. They remember sleeping, and that is enough. As they settle again or begin to wake, the house continues its quiet work. Earth fire and human presence hold steady. The youngest among you rest deeply unaware of how carefully the night has been managed around them. Time loses its sharp edges here. Without clocks or lamps bright enough to mark hours clearly, the night stretches and folds in on itself. You do not know exactly when you fall asleep or when you wake. You only know that rest comes in layers like everything else in this house. You open your eyes briefly and have no sense of how long you have been lying still. The fire glows faintly, then brighter as someone feeds it. Or perhaps that happened earlier, and you are remembering it late. The difference no longer matters. Night is not something to be measured. It is something to move through. People living like this learn to stop expecting uninterrupted sleep. Waking was not failure. It was part of the pattern. You wake to adjust bedding. You wake to listen. You wake to tend the fire or check a child's breathing. Then you sleep again, often more deeply than before. Rest arrives in segments stitched together by familiarity. Some nights you sleep for hours at a time. Other nights you drift in and out, never fully sinking. Both are acceptable outcomes. The body adapts when given no alternative. Fatigue teaches efficiency. You notice how your thoughts behave differently during these waking moments. They are slower, less demanding. There is no urge to plan or review. The darkness keeps ideas close to the present. You think about warmth, about the sound of breathing nearby, about whether the fire feels right. Then thought fades again. There are scattered references in older letters to people rising briefly in the night to talk quietly, share food, or simply sit by the fire. These moments were not considered insomnia. They were pauses. The night made room for them. You shift and feel the ground beneath you again steady and unchanging. That constancy helps. When everything else feels uncertain, the earth remains reliable. It holds your weight without comment, reminding your body that it is supported even when awareness drifts. Without clocks, time is read through sensation, the cooling of air, the hunger that returns gently before morning, the way joints stiffen then loosen again. You learn to recognize these signs without naming them. Later observers sometimes tried to impose structure on this kind of rest, dividing it into categories and schedules. Those attempts rarely match lived experience. Sleep here is responsive rather than planned. It follows need rather than rules. You notice that waking does not bring frustration. There is nothing to miss out on. No deadline approaches. Night work may still happen, but it does not belong to you right now. You're allowed to rest when rest arrives. A child stirs nearby, then settles again. Someone shifts blankets. The fire pops softly. These interruptions do not feel disruptive. They are part of the environment, like wind passing over the roof. Eventually, without knowing when or how, you drift deeper. The house recedes. Sensation narrows. Time dissolves completely. Sleep becomes heavier, less aware of interruption. When morning finally begins to form, it does not feel like an ending. It feels like another gradual shift, light replacing dark as quietly as warmth replaces cold. You stretch slightly and realize you're rested enough. Not fully restored, but capable. That is the measure that matters here. Sleep has done its work in pieces, and that is sufficient. The house holds its quiet. The night releases you without ceremony. Time resumes its shape slowly, and you move with it, carrying the rhythm of broken rest into the day. The storm announces itself long before it arrives, not with sound, but with pressure. You feel it first as a tightening in the air, a sense that the house is bracing for something larger than an ordinary night. The fire behaves differently. Smoke hesitates before finding its way out. Even breathing feels heavier, as if the room is holding still on purpose. When the blizzard finally reaches you, it does not roar. That is the strange part. You expect noise. You expect violence. Instead, the earth house turns the storm into weight and silence. Snow piles up above you layer upon layer, and you only know it is happening because the roof seems to press downward with a steady, patient insistence. You lie awake for a while, listening for signs of trouble. Not listening with your ears exactly, but with your whole body. The house communicates through subtle changes. A beam tightens. A wall cools unevenly. Somewhere overhead, snow shifts and settles with a soft, distant thud that feels more like a vibration than a sound. Outside, the world is being erased. Wind scours open ground, filling tracks and burying markers. Drifts rise higher than fence. But inside, the storm becomes background. The earth absorbs the chaos and gives you back something manageable. People who slept through nights like this learned quickly not to imagine the outside too vividly. Thinking about wind and exposure only sharpened fear. Instead, attention turned inward. Is the fire steady? Is the door sealed? Is everyone breathing evenly? These questions mattered. Everything else could wait. You notice how the air grows warmer as snow deepens. It seems backward at first, but the weight above you traps heat more effectively than bare ground ever could. Snow fills gaps, seals, cracks, and adds another insulating layer to the roof. The house feels heavier and safer at the same time. Someone stirs near the doorway, checking the seal without opening it. A hand presses against packed earth, feeling for drafts. Nothing changes. The storm is loud out there, but here it is only felt as containment. There are moments when the house seems to disappear entirely. Darkness, warmth, shared breath, and the low glow of embers become the whole world. The idea of distance loses meaning. The storm could last hours or days. You would not know until it ended. You drift in and out of light sleep, waking occasionally when snow shifts overhead. Each time the house holds, no creaks of alarm, no sudden drops, just adjustment. You begin to trust that whatever is happening above is being managed without your involvement. Children sleep deeply through it. Their bodies seem to recognize that nothing is required of them. Adults remain more alert even while resting awareness hovering just below the surface. Responsibility does not fully release its grip during storms. At one point, the fire dims more than expected. Someone wakes and feeds it carefully, using smaller pieces than usual to avoid drawing too much air. Flames rise briefly, then settle. The house responds, redistributing warmth where it is needed. There is a strange intimacy to storm nights. Everyone knows the same thing without saying it. Leaving now would mean danger. Staying means endurance. That shared understanding tightens the group together more effectively than fear ever could. You listen to the absence of sound. No wind howls. No boards rattle. The earth has taken those things and buried them. What remains is stillness, thick and reassuring. Later, when people try to describe these nights, they often struggle to explain how calm they felt despite the danger outside. Words like safe or sheltered felt too simple. The sensation was closer to being held, not by walls alone, but by the land itself. As the storm continues, time stretches again. Hunger does not intrude yet. Cold does not bite. The system is working as intended. Yet earth, snow and bodies all contribute their part. Eventually sleep deepens. The storm becomes nothing more than a faint pressure above your dreams. You stop waking to check. Trust replaces vigilance. When morning begins to edge in, it does so reluctantly. Light seeps into the doorway crack, reflecting off snow piled high. The door will take effort to open. That is tomorrow's problem. For now, you lie still, listening to the quiet aftermath of a storm that never truly entered your world. The Earth House has done what it was meant to do. It turned chaos into silence and danger into rest. You breathe evenly, surrounded by weight, warmth, and the knowledge that winter passed over you without finding a way in. When the storm passes, it leaves something behind that lingers longer than snow. A heaviness settles in the quiet, not physical this time, but emotional. You notice it in the way the house feels smaller than it did yesterday, as if the walls have crept inward while you slept. Nothing has changed in measurement, only in perception. Isolation presses differently after long storms. Before, winter felt like a challenge you met each day. Now it feels like a pause that stretches without clear edges. The outside world has been muted for so long that it begins to feel theoretical, something you remember rather than experience. You sit up and listen. No wind, no drifting snow, just the soft, contained sounds of life inside the house. Breathing, fabric shifting, a coal settling in the fire pit. The silence is complete enough to feel loud. Living underground amplifies this effect. You do not see distance. You do not watch weather move across a horizon. You feel it indirectly filtered through soil and habit. Without visual cues, time and space compress. Days blur, nights blend together. People who endured winters like this often wrote less as the season dragged on. Not because nothing happened, but because everything felt the same. Cold, dark, contained. Words became repetitive and repetition felt pointless. Survival did not need commentary. You notice how thoughts circle now instead of moving forward. You think about the same small details repeatedly. The fire, the doorway, where the supplies will last. These thoughts are not dramatic, they are persistent. They sit quietly in the mind, returning whenever silence deepens. There is a particular stillness that comes from knowing you cannot leave easily. Snowdrifts block paths. Wind scours landmarks away. Even if you wanted to walk, the cold would claim too much energy too quickly. The house becomes not just shelter but boundary. You lie back down even though it is not time to sleep. Rest becomes a default state when movement has no clear purpose. Muscles soften, the body conserves. This stillness can feel peaceful or oppressive depending on the moment. Some people learn to manage this weight by creating small rituals, telling the same story again, counting supplies, rearranging objects that did not need rearranging. These acts offered a sense of movement when the world refused to provide it. You feel the presence of others more strongly now, not through conversation but through proximity. Shared space magnifies moods. Tension spreads quietly, calm does too. When someone exhales deeply, you feel it. When someone shifts restlessly, it registers immediately. Children adapt to this isolation more easily. They accept the boundaries of the house as the whole world for now. Adults remember more. Memory becomes both comfort and burden. You think of open skies, of walking without counting steps of distance that did not threaten. The Earth House holds everything in: sound, smell, emotion. There is no easy way to release excess. When frustration rises, it has nowhere to go but inward. People learn to soften their reactions to let feelings pass without amplifying them. Later accounts sometimes describe this period as to the hardest part of winter, not because of cold but because of sameness. When danger becomes routine, it loses urgency, but gains weight. Endurance shifts from physical to mental. You notice how careful everyone has become with words. Conversations shorten, silences lengthen. No one wants to waste energy explaining things already understood. Communication becomes efficient, almost minimalist. At night, lying in the dark, you listen not for storms but for change. A difference in the fire's behavior. A new sound from outside, anything that signals movement in the larger world. When nothing comes, you adjust again. The house remains steady. It does not offer distraction. It offers containment. That containment is both protection and challenge. It keeps winter out and presses thought inward. You find comfort in small certainties. The fire will need feeding. Morning will come even if it looks much like today. Bodies nearby will breathe through the night. These truths anchor you when larger questions feel too heavy. Sleep arrives unevenly now. Not because of fear, but because the mind wanders. You drift, wake, drift again. Dreams blend with memory. The house feels present even in sleep, shaping what rises and what fades. Eventually rest settles deeper. The mind quiets enough to release its grip. You let go of the need for variety, for motion, for reassurance beyond what the house already provides. Outside you, the world remains distant and buried. Inside, life continues in close quarters, measured not by milestones but by persistence. The Earth House does not promise ease. It promises that if you remain, you will endure. You breathe slowly and allow that promise to be enough for tonight. When the weather eases just enough, the house opens itself to others again. Not fully, not generously, just enough to let people pass through in careful turns. Visits during winter do not look like visits in warmer seasons. They are quieter, shorter, shaped by cold and caution rather than leisure. You hear it before you see it. A knock that is not really a knock, more like a soft request against packed earth. The door opens only part way at first. Cold air slips in sharp and alert, then retreats as the door closes again. Someone shakes snow from their shoulders before stepping fully inside, careful not to bring too much winter with them. Voices stay low, not out of secrecy but habit. Sound carries differently here, and no one wants to disturb the careful balance of warmth and rest. Greetings are brief, faces are familiar. Everyone knows why they are here. Connection matters more in winter because it is rarer. People sit close to the fire, not crowding, just aligning themselves where heat moves best. There is no rearranging of furniture for comfort. Bodies adapt instead. Hands extend towards warmth. Boots are turned sideways so souls can soften without steaming. Conversation unfolds slowly. Stories told here are not new. They do not need to be. Familiar narratives offer stability. Someone recounts a detail from earlier in the season. Another nods already, knowing the ending. Repetition is not boring in winter. It is reassuring. You notice how information moves through these visits. Not announced, not organized. A comment about snow depth. A quiet mention of fuel running low. A glance exchanged when illness is mentioned. Everyone listens without appearing to. Knowledge spreads this way, settling where it is needed. Children watch from the edges, absorbing tone and rhythm. They learn how long to stay, when to sit, when to stand. They notice how adults measure time not by clocks, but by cold creeping back toward the door. Food is sometimes shared, but sparingly. A piece of bread broken, a sip passed carefully. Hospitality here is modest by necessity. Offering too much risks tomorrow. Offering nothing risks connection. Balance again guides behaviour. You sense how much effort these visits require. Walking through snow, breaking trail, exposing the body to cold even briefly costs energy that cannot be replaced easily. No one comes without purpose. Even companionship serves a function. It reminds people they are not alone in this. When it is time to leave, no one lingers. The door opens. Cold rushes in. Farewells are quick, sincere, unadorned. The visitor steps back into winter and disappears almost immediately, swallowed by white and distance. Afterward, as the house feels fuller for a while, even after warmth has equalized again, voices echo faintly in memory. New information settles into routine. Someone mentions adjusting the fire differently tonight. Someone else checks supplies with a thoughtful pause. Later observers sometimes struggle to understand how social life survived under these conditions. They imagined isolation as absolute, but connection here does not vanish. It compresses. It becomes efficient. It strips itself of excess until only what matters remains. You lie back down and replay fragments of conversation without meaning to. Not words exactly, but tone, familiar laughter. The comfort of shared understanding. These sounds linger longer than the visit itself. The house returns to its quieter state, but something has shifted. Knowledge has been exchanged. Spirits have lifted slightly. The night feels less heavy. As sleep approaches, again you recognize that community here is not built on gatherings or celebrations. It is built on brief moments of recognition, on showing up despite effort, on sharing space without demanding much from it. Outside, the cold closes in again. Inside, the fire resumes its steady rhythm. The earth absorbs sound and warmth as it always does. You drift towards sleep, carrying the subtle reassurance that others are nearby, enduring the same night under their own roofs of soil and snow. The frontier does not feel wide right now. It feels close connected by paths only briefly visible. Rest comes easier with that knowledge. The house holds you. The night moves on. Repairs do not wait for spring. You learn that quickly. Cold does not pause damage. It sharpens it. A draft that barely mattered in autumn becomes intolerable now. A soft spot in the roof that held through rain demands attention when snow presses down for days without melting. You notice the problem first by feel rather than sight. A thin line of cold brushes your ankle whenever the wind shifts direction. It is subtle, but once felt, it cannot be unfelt. The house has developed a weakness, and winter has found it. No one announces the need for repair. Movement simply begins. Someone presses a palm against the wall, tracing temperature differences the way others read weather. Another person gathers scraps of cloth, dry grass, bits of hide. Materials or whatever exists at hand. There is no trip to a store. There is only making do. Fixing things in winter requires a different patience than building them. Earth is harder now, less willing to move. Fingers numb quickly. Tools bite reluctantly. Everything takes longer, and speed risks mistakes. You work slowly, breathing into your hands between motions, careful not to open the house to cold any longer than necessary. There is a particular tension to working on the roof in winter. Snow must be moved aside without removing too much insulation. Sod slabs are lifted just enough to reach the problem beneath, then replaced, carefully resealed with snow packed down again. The roof looks unchanged afterward, but everyone knows it has been touched. You feel the cold more sharply during these moments. Heat escapes, briefly making the interior feel hollow and exposed. Someone tends the fire aggressively while work happens, feeding it faster than usual. The house protests, then stabilizes. People learn through experience that ignoring small damage was far more dangerous than enduring a short burst of cold to fix it. A minor draft could grow, moisture could freeze where it should not. The cost of delay was often paid at night when fixes were harder to make. There is a quiet ingenuity in how repairs happen. A cracked beam is supported with a wedge cut by firelight. A gap is stuffed with layered fabric arranged to slow air rather than stop it completely. Perfection is never the goal. Function is. You notice how little discussion accompanies this work. Everyone knows what needs doing. Advice is given by gesture, a nod, a hand extended. Words feel unnecessary. The house has taught these lessons already. Children watch from a distance, absorbing without instruction. They see how attention shifts when something feels wrong. They learn that maintenance is not an event but a constant state of awareness. Things hold because someone keeps them holding. Later, when the repair is done, the house feels different. Not visibly, sensationally, the draft is gone. Warmth redistributes more evenly, the room exhales, and so do you. Relief arrives quietly without celebration. Some nights, multiple small repairs stack up. A door seal adjusted, a pot moved to catch dripping meltwater. Bedding rearranged to block cold spots. These actions blur together, barely remembered by morning, yet essential to getting there. People who later tried to describe frontier homes often focused on how they were built, not how they were maintained. That misses half the story. Survival here depends less on initial construction than on constant attentive adjustment. You lie back down and test the space, instinctively extending a foot where cold used to creep. Nothing, just steady air. The fix has held. The fire settles again. The house returns to its familiar balance. The interruption fades into memory, almost immediately replaced by the deep quiet of night. Winter continues its work outside. Inside, the house has been reminded of its purpose and reinforced where it mattered. You rest easier knowing that even now in the deepest cold, the place around you can still be shaped by patient hands. Sleep comes with less resistance tonight. The small act of repair has restored not just warmth, but trust. The Earth House remains responsive, forgiving and alive to the care given it. Comfort arrives in this place quiet, silly, almost shyly. It never announces itself as relief. It slips in through small allowances made over time, through objects and habits that soften the edges without ever pretending to erase them. You begin to notice these comforts only because you would miss them immediately if they were gone. A folded cloth placed just right beneath your shoulder. A smooth stone warmed near the fire and tucked into bedding to radiate heat longer than embers can. A mug kept close not for drinking but for the reassurance of holding something warm in your hands before sleep. None of these things are essential on their own. Together they make the night tolerable. You adjust your position slightly and feel the difference where the ground meets a layer added weeks ago. Straw replaced. A hide turned. Someone noticed the pressure point and changed it without comment. This is how comfort works here. It is not requested. It is noticed and quietly addressed. People carried small personal items through a winter not for sentiment alone but for grounding. A wooden spoon smoothed by years of use. A scrap of cloth from an earlier home. A book read so often by firelight that its pages fell open on their own. These objects did not make the house warmer, but they made the night feel shorter. There is a habit you recognize now. Before settling down, someone always checks a particular corner of the room. Nothing lives there, nothing is stored there, but that corner holds cold differently, and adjusting a blanket or shifting a body by a few inches changes everything. This knowledge is specific and learned. It belongs to this house alone. You notice how people choose places to sit based not on furniture but on how heat moves. A stool placed closer to the wall. A log pulled nearer the fire. Comfort follows invisible lines drawn by warmth and air. You learn these paths by living within them. Food plays a role here too. Not meals exactly, but small allowances saved for night. A bit of fat kept aside, a crust softened in broth and eaten slowly. These are not indulgences. They are strategies. A warm stomach eases the mind as much as the body. Some comforts are sounds. A familiar story told again without variation. The steady rasp of mending. The low murmur of conversation that does not require response. These sounds do not stimulate. They settle. They signal that nothing urgent is happening right now. You lie back and feel the house responding as it always does. Heat shifts. Air stills. The space becomes predictable enough to rest in. Predictability itself becomes comfort after weeks of uncertainty outside. There are moments when someone does something purely to improve the night, not survival. A bit of ash swept away so it does not smell sharp. A lamp adjusted to soften shadows rather than brighten them. A blanket shaken to trap more air. These acts do not change outcomes dramatically. They change how it feels to endure. Later, when people looked back on winters like this, they often remembered these small comforts more vividly than the hardships. The mind holds on to what eased the strain. The rest blurs together into cold and dark without detail. You notice how your own expectations have shifted. Comfort no longer means warmth alone. It means absence of surprise. It means knowing where your hands will land in the dark. It means trusting that the fire will behave and the walls will respond. There is a rhythm to these comforts. They are applied gradually as winter deepens. Early on, people tolerate more discomfort, saving effort and materials. Later, when fatigue sets in, comfort becomes a form of maintenance. Spirits require tending just like walls and fire. You breathe in and out, slowly aware of how much easier it is to settle now compared to the first nights. Nothing dramatic has changed. The house is the same. The cold is the same. You are different. You know where to place yourself within it all. Some comforts are invisible. A decision not to speak. A pause before reacting. Letting a minor annoyance pass rather than grow. Emotional comfort matters as much as physical here, though it is rarely named. You think briefly of places where comfort is abundant and taken for granted. Beds lifted from the ground, rooms warmed evenly, silence chosen rather than enforced. The thought feels distant, almost theoretical. This place has redefined the word. As sleep approaches, you pull the familiar items closer. Cloth, heat, sound. The night feels manageable, even kind in its own restrained way. These small comforts do not make winter easy. They make it survivable without breaking you. The house holds steady. The fire breathes low. The ground supports without complaint. You rest in the knowledge that comfort does not need to be grand to matter. It only needs to be enough. Your breathing slows. The small allowances you have gathered around yourself do their work. Sleep arrives not because the night is gentle, but because you have learned how to meet it where it is. Fear does not shout here. It settles low and stays there, a quiet awareness that follows you into sleep, whether you invite it or not. You learn to live with it because pretending it does not exist would be far more dangerous. Nighttime hazards are understood without being discussed, and that understanding shapes how you rest. Fire is the first thought. Always. You trust it, but you never forget what it can do. As you lie down, your body remains attuned to changes in smell, to shifts in light, to sounds that do not belong. The crackle of embers is comforting. The sudden roar of flame would not be. Even half asleep, some part of you listens. People arrange sleeping spaces with this in mind. No one rests directly against the fire pit. Blankets are kept clear of sparks. Tools are placed where they can be reached in the dark. These choices are not dramatic. They are habits repeated so often they feel natural. There are stories passed quietly of fires getting away from families in the night. These stories are rarely told in detail. A mention, a pause, a look exchanged. The lesson does not need elaboration. Everyone understands what is being referenced, and no one wants to dwell on it longer than necessary. You notice how carefully the fire is banked tonight. Embers gathered inward, larger pieces set aside, airflow controlled so nothing flares unexpectedly. This is not just about conserving fuel, it is about managing risk while allowing sleep to happen. Beyond fire there are other dangers. A roof weakened by thaw and refreeze, a door that does not seal properly. Carbon-heavy air that dulls the senses if left unchecked. These possibilities do not haunt you. They sit quietly at the edge of awareness, informing behavior rather than disturbing it. You shift and feel how close everything is. There is no distance between you and what might harm you. That closeness sharpens attention. You sleep lighter than you might elsewhere, waking easily to small changes. This light sleep is not exhaustion, it is adaptation. Some families kept a pot of water or damp earth nearby, not because they expected disaster, but because preparedness brought peace of mind. Knowing there was a response available made rest possible. The same logic applied to everything else. Anticipation reduced fear. Children sense this atmosphere without understanding it. They sleep deeply trusting adults to remain alert. That trust carries weight. It keeps you listening even when your body longs for deeper rest. Later reflections on frontier life sometimes emphasize bravery or recklessness. That framing misses the truth. What allowed people to sleep was caution practiced daily quietly without ceremony. Fear was acknowledged and managed, not ignored. You notice how fear itself changes over time. Early in winter it feels sharp, unfamiliar. By now it has softened into something like respect. You know what the night can do. You know what you can do in response. That knowledge steadies you. As hours pass, the fire behaves. The roof holds. The air remains breathable. Each of these confirmations relaxes you a little more. Trust accumulates, slowly built on nights that end without incident. You drift closer to sleep, again awareness hovering just below the surface. This is the compromise the house offers. You can rest, but you'll never be completely unaware. The environment demands a portion of your attention at all times. Eventually, even that vigilance fades. Your body recognizes familiar patterns and lets go. Fear retreats into the background present, but no longer pressing. Morning will come, and with it new risks and tasks. For now, the night remains contained. The dangers you know how to manage have been managed again. You breathe evenly, the fires glow steady, the house quiet. Sleep settles in. Not because risk is absent, but because you have learned how to live alongside it without letting it take over. Dreams come differently here. You notice it only after waking, when fragments linger longer than usual, heavy and close to the body. They do not drift far, they stay grounded, shaped by the room, by the low ceiling, by the steady pressure of earth and shared breath. You dream of small spaces that feel safe rather than confining. Narrow paths, warm pockets, hands moving carefully in dim light. Even when the dream turns uneasy, it does not spiral outward. There is always a wall nearby, always a place to lean to press a palm and feel something solid answer back. Sleep arrives in layers, and so do dreams. Some pass quickly, barely forming. Others repeat with slight changes night after night until they feel less like dreams and more like rehearsals. Your mind practices survival the same way your body does, through repetition rather than imagination. You wake briefly and realize you have been dreaming of the house itself. Not as it looks, but as it feels. The slope of the roof, the warmth near the fire, the cold that gathers in one stubborn corner. These details appear without effort. They are familiar enough to become symbols. People living this way often describe dreams that borrow directly from daily routines. Digging, carrying, adjusting, nothing fantastical. The extraordinary lies elsewhere. Here the mind circles what it knows, reinforcing patterns that keep you alive. You shift slightly and settle again, and the dream resumes where it left off, seamless as breath. There is comfort in that continuity. It suggests that rest has sunk deep enough to stitch waking and sleeping together. Children dream differently still. Their sleep is heavier, less interrupted. When they wake frightened, it is rarely the darkness itself that disturbs them. It is change, a fire burning too brightly, a sound that does not belong. Stability calms them more effectively than reassurance. As an adult, your dreams carry responsibility even when they soften. You dream of checking the fire and finding it steady, of closing the door and feeling the air settle, of waking before dawn and knowing exactly what to do. These dreams do not excite, they reassure. Later in the season, when exhaustion deepens, dreams grow quieter. Images blur. Sensation replaces narrative. Warmth, pressure, stillness. The mind rests the way the body does without reaching outwards. You wake again briefly aware of where you are, then slip back under. There is no jolt of confusion. The house anchors you. Even half asleep, you know your surroundings intimately. Some mornings people remember dreams clearly. Other mornings, nothing remained. Both were accepted without comment. Dreams were not treated as messages or warnings here. They were simply part of rest, another process happening, alongside digestion and breathing. You notice that nightmares are rare. Fear exists in waking life managed deliberately. At night, the mind does not need to invent threats. The cold, the dark, and the house itself are enough to occupy attention. As sleep deepens toward its final stretch, dreams thin out entirely. Consciousness narrows to sensation alone. Breath, warmth, the faint glow behind closed eyes. When you eventually wake, the feeling lingers that you have not travelled far. Your mind has stayed close to where your body rests. This closeness leaves you steadier, less disoriented. The Earth House shapes even this part of life. It keeps dreams from roaming too widely. It teaches the mind the same lesson. It teaches the body. Stay close. Conserve. Trust what holds you. You breathe slowly, suspended between waking and sleep for a moment longer, then let the last fragments fade. The night continues its quiet passage and you move with it, grounded even in rest. When you think about other kinds of houses, the comparison happens without effort. You imagine log walls stacked high, corners squared, and sharp roofs rising into open air. You imagine floors lifted off the ground, beds, raised space, stretching upward instead of pressing inward. The image feels almost extravagant now. Log cabins promised familiarity. Wood looked like shelter was supposed to look. Straight lines, right angles, a visible boundary between indoors and out. For many people arriving on the frontier, that image carried reassurance long before winter arrived. It matched expectations carried from elsewhere. But winter has a way of rearranging preferences. You lie still and think about how this earth house behaves when the cold deepens, how the walls slow temperature changes instead of amplifying them, how sound softens rather than echoes, how the roof disappears under snow instead of fighting it. These qualities do not announce themselves as advantages. They reveal themselves slowly night after night. Log cabins warm quickly, but they also cool quickly. You feel every change in wind, every lull in the fire. The air moves more freely, carrying both warmth and cold wherever it wants to go. That movement can feel refreshing at first. Later it feels demanding. Here the air moves reluctantly, heat stays where it is placed. Cold arrives slowly enough to be managed. You stop reacting and start anticipating. That difference matters more than you expected. People talked about this quietly, usually after a long night rather than before. Someone would mention how the house held through a temperature drop. Someone else would nod, remembering a cabin where frost formed on every surface before midnight. These comparisons were not arguments. They were observations shaped by tired bodies. There were reasons people preferred cabins when they could get them. Earth houses required constant attention to moisture. They asked you to accept darkness and low ceilings. They made some people uneasy, especially those unused to living so close to the ground. Pride played a role too. A cabin looked permanent in a way a dugout did not. But winter redefines permanence. You think about how the earth house feels when storms pass. How it does not shudder or complain. How snow becomes an ally instead of a threat. A cabin might stand visibly against weather. This house withdraws from it. Later on, when timber became easier to acquire, many families moved out of earth houses without hesitation. Others lingered. Some used both sleeping underground during the coldest stretches and retreating to cabins when conditions softened. Choice replaced necessity, and with it came variety. There are stories of people returning to earth houses after trying cabins through harsh winters. They rarely framed the decision as emotional. They framed it as practical. Sleeping felt easier. Fuel lasted longer. Nights felt less dramatic. That mattered more than appearances. You notice how little drama exists here. Nothing creaks loudly, nothing whistles. The house rarely startles you awake. That steadiness changes how you rest. Sleep deepens when the environment stops asking for constant attention. Cabins offered space, earth houses offered stability. Space can feel generous until you have to heat it. Stability feels restrictive until you realize how much effort it saves. You adjust your bedding and feel the familiar firmness beneath you. This is another difference. Raised floors isolate you from ground moisture, but expose you to air movement. Sleeping here on packed earth trades one discomfort for another. Over time, you learn which trade feels easier to live with. People who wrote later about frontier housing often described earth houses as temporary solutions. That description overlooks how long some were used and how deliberately they were maintained. Temporary does not always mean inferior. Sometimes it means adaptable. You think of the neighbours who chose cabins and those who chose earth. Their reasons overlapped but did not match exactly. Access to materials, skill with tools, personal tolerance for darkness or damp. The landscape shaped choices, but so did temperament. As winter wore on, opinions shifted. Someone who scoffed at earth houses in autumn might look at one with new respect by January. Someone proud of a cabin might quietly admit how much fuel it consumed. These admissions happened without ceremony, often over shared work rather than conversation. You realize that a preference here is shaped less by ideology and more by sleep. Whichever structure lets you rest longer, wake steadier and move through the day with fewer sharp edges, becomes the better house regardless of how it looks from the outside. Lying here now, you cannot imagine trading this quiet containment for taller walls and colder air. The thought feels like choosing exposure over shelter simply because exposure looks familiar. That familiarity will return eventually. Spring will open the landscape again. Cabins will feel inviting. Doors will stay open longer. Earth houses will seem dim and heavy by comparison. Memory is shaped by season. But winter decides differently. Tonight, with the ground holding steady beneath you and the roof pressing gently above, the comparison settles. This house may not impress anyone passing by. It does not announce survival, practices it. Your breathing slows as the thought fades. There is no need to resolve the comparison fully. The night has already answered it in the only way that matters. You're warm enough, you are still, you can sleep. The Earth House has earned its place not by promise but by performance, repeated quietly through the longest nights. Endurance sneaks up on you. There is no moment when you realize you have become good at this. One night simply feels less difficult than the ones before it, and you do not question why. You move through the dark without hesitation. You adjust the fire without thinking. You sleep longer stretches without waking to check the walls. Cold routines settle into the body first. Hands know where to go, feet know where not to linger. You no longer test the air with your face when you wake. You already understand how it will feel. The house has become predictable, and predictability is its own form of warmth. You notice how little effort it takes now to prepare for sleep. Bedding is arranged quickly, clothing falls into familiar order. You do not pause to consider comfort. You assume it will arrive eventually, as it always does. This assumption frees mental space, allowing fatigue to flow naturally into rest. At the beginning of winter, each night felt like a negotiation. Now it feels like a continuation. You do not brace yourself anymore. You simply lie down and let the system carry you. Firewalls, shared heat and habit do their work without supervision. People living this way often described a point when winter stopped feeling like an opponent and started feeling like a condition. That shift changes everything. When something stops feeling personal, it stops demanding constant emotional response. Cold becomes background rather than threat. You stretch slightly and feel how your body responds differently than it did weeks ago. Movements are smaller, more efficient. Muscles have learned which tensions are unnecessary. Sleep comes faster because there is less internal resistance. There are signs of this adaptation everywhere. Children wake less often. Adults speak less about discomfort. Complaints fade not because conditions improve, but because attention shifted. Energy is conserved by letting go of commentary. You listen to the house and realize that you are no longer cataloguing its sounds. Early on, every creak felt important. Now those sounds blend into a single presence. You chilled, the roof settles, the walls breathe, the fire hums. None of it demands interpretation anymore. This familiarity creates a strange calm. You know what will happen if the fire drops too low. You know how the air will feel before it becomes a problem. Knowledge replaces anxiety. Experience replaces speculation. You remember the first nights when sleep came reluctantly interrupted by cold fingers and racing thoughts. Those memories feel distant now, like something that happened to someone else. The body adapts faster than memory updates. Some evenings you even find yourself appreciating the stillness. The absence of surprise becomes soothing. Nothing dramatic is expected tonight. That expectation allows rest to deepen. Endurance is not dramatic here. It does not announce victory. It looks like routine, like hands moving automatically, like waking without dread, like sleeping without rehearsal. You lie back and feel the ground beneath you steady as ever. The walls feel close but no longer oppressive. They feel familiar, like a posture you have learned to hold comfortably. Outside, winter continues without change. Inside, you have changed enough to meet it. That difference is subtle but decisive. As sleep approaches, you realize that survival here is no longer something you actively do. It is something that happens because you have aligned yourself with the conditions rather than resisting them. Breathing slows. The night unfolds without friction. Endurance has become normal, and normal has become easy to live with. You drift off knowing that tonight requires no special effort. The work has already been done by weeks of repetition. The house holds. Your body understands. Winter passes another night without demanding your attention. You begin listening for spring long before it arrives. Not with hope exactly, but with curiosity. The house teaches you to notice small shifts. The way snow sounds when it falls. The way it sounds when it slides. The way it sounds when it begins to drip. At first, the changes are almost imaginary. A faint softening in the air near the doorway. Snow that clumps instead of powdering. Water appearing where none should be. These signs come and go teasing rather than promising. You learn not to trust the first ones. Sleep remains cautious during this time. The cold has not released its grip yet, and neither have you. Nights are still long, fires still need tending. But something has loosened slightly. The house feels less compressed. The silence feels less heavy. You wake one morning and realize the frost along the walls has thinned. Not gone, just less persistent. The fire warms the room faster now. Moisture behaves differently, draining instead of lingering. The house responds immediately to these changes, adjusting the same way it always has. People here rarely spoke about spring directly until it was undeniable. Talking about it too early felt like tempting disappointment. Instead, attention stayed on routine. Tasks continued. Repairs were still made. Sleep arrangements remained unchanged. You notice how bodies respond first. Children grow restless at night, waking earlier, shifting more. Adults feel an unfamiliar urge to move, to stretch, to step outside longer than necessary. The house still holds you, but it no longer feels like the only safe place. Snow outside begins to settle unevenly. Drifts shrink on one side of the house while lingering stubbornly on another. Sunlight enters at a slightly different angle. It lingers a little longer each day, brightening the room just enough to be noticed. You lie awake one night listening to water move above you, not rushing, just trickling. Meltwater finding paths through soil and sod. This sound brings both relief and concern. Thaw weakens as much as it frees. Roofs must be watched carefully now. Drainage matters again. Sleep during this period is lighter, not from fear, but anticipation. The house has carried you through the worst. Now it asks for a different kind of attention. You are alert to smells that signal damp, to soft spots underfoot, to changes in air that suggest opening, not closing. Someone checks the roof during daylight, pressing, gently feeling for give. Snow is cleared in narrow channels to guide water away without stripping insulation entirely. These actions mark the transition more clearly than any calendar ever could. At night, the house feels restless too. It shifts more often. Sounds return that have been absent for weeks, drips, settling. The fire behaves differently, drawing air more eagerly. You adjust without frustration. Change is expected now. You find yourself thinking ahead during these nights, not planning in detail, just imagining movement, walking farther, sleeping with the door open longer, letting the house breathe again. These thoughts do not disrupt rest. They accompany it gently. The ground beneath you begins to soften. It yields slightly where it was once unyielding. That sensation alone feels monumental. The earth has begun to release you slowly, carefully on its own terms. You still sleep in the same place, you still layer clothing, you still bank the fire, but the rhythm has shifted. Winter is no longer tightening. It is loosening, one small allowance at a time. When sleep comes now, it carries a different tone, less defensive, more open. Dreams begin to stretch outward again, testing distance. The house remains present, but it no longer contains every thought. You drift off, listening not for storms, but for change. The night holds fewer demands. The work ahead will be different, but it will come with daylight and movement. For now, you rest where you are balanced between seasons. The earth house remains steady beneath you, having done its work. Winter has not ended, but has begun to step back. Sleep deepens, carrying you forward toward a morning that will look, feel and sound just slightly different than the last. There comes a night when you realize this winter will be the last one spent here. The thought does not arrive dramatically. It settles the way everything else has, quietly, almost cautiously, as if testing whether it belongs. You do not act on it yet. You simply notice it and let it sit beside you. The house feels familiar in a way that surprises you. What once seemed temporary now feels shaped to your body and habits. You know where the floor dips slightly. You know which wall stays coolest even on mild nights. You know how the fire sounds when it will last until morning. This knowledge has become intimate. As temperatures lift during the day, the earth house behaves differently. It warms faster and cools faster too. The balance shifts. What protected you in deep winter now holds heat a little too long. Air feels thicker. Moisture lingers where it did not before. These changes are subtle but unmistakable. You sleep more lightly now, not because of cold, but because the house is beginning to feel finished with its task. It carried you through the worst. That work is nearly complete. Staying too long would mean fighting conditions in the opposite direction. People often spoke of this transition without nostalgia at first. Moving on required energy planning and timing. Sentiment came later after distance softened memory. In the moment, the decision felt practical rather than emotional. You begin shifting small things during the day. Tools placed nearer the door, personal items gathered together, bedding folded differently as if rehearsing for another arrangement. These actions happen without ceremony. No one announces them. The house notices anyway. At night, lying down for what may be the last few times you feel the walls more distinctly. Not closing in, just present. They have been close for months, and now that closeness feels almost gentle. Familiar pressure rather than confinement. You remember the first nights here, how strange it felt to sleep inside the land itself. That unease has vanished. The earth no longer feels foreign. It feels cooperative, even generous. Leaving does not feel like escape. It feels like timing. Some families remained in Earth's houses longer than necessary, delaying his shift to other dwellings because familiarity is its own comfort. Others left as soon as conditions allowed, eager for light and height and air. Neither choice was wrong. Each reflected different tolerances shaped by the same winter. You turn onto your side and listen to the house settle. Sounds are sharper now, less muffled by the deep cold. The roof responds to temperature changes more actively. The walls release moisture more freely. The system that once held steady through weeks of ice now begins to flex. There is relief in knowing you will not need to ask this house to do everything anymore. Relief mixed with respect. It carried a heavy load. It deserves rest as much as you do. Sleep comes with a different flavour now. Less guarded, less compressed. Your body has begun to anticipate movement change expansion. Dreams stretch farther again, reaching beyond walls and roof. You wake once in the night and look around, committing details to memory without trying. The slope of the ceiling, the pattern of smoke stains, the way light pools near the doorway even in darkness. These details imprint themselves quietly. Later, when people spoke of earth houses, they often framed them as something endured. That is true, but incomplete. What lingers is not just hardship, but the knowledge gained through closeness and restraint. You settle back down and let sleep take you again. There will be time to dismantle, to move to build or occupy something new. Tonight is still held by the same walls, the same ground, the same low fire. The earth house does not mark endings. It simply holds until it no longer needs to. You rest within it one more night, knowing that when you leave, part of you will remain here, pressed into soil and memory alike. Breathing slows. The house remains steady. Winter loosens its grip further. You sleep with the quiet understanding that this chapter is closing gently without demand. The earth holds the last of the night with the same patience it has shown all winter. You lie still and feel how little effort it takes now to rest. The ground no longer feels cold against you. It feels neutral, steady, almost familiar in a way you did not expect months ago. This house has taught you a different way of thinking about shelter. Not as something that stands apart from the land, but as something that borrows from it. You did not conquer the cold here. You stepped into a quieter agreement with it. The walls absorbed what they could. The roof accepted weight without complaint. The floor reminded you constantly where warmth came from and where it went. You think back to the first night when everything felt uncertain and temporary. The smell of damp earth, the low ceiling, the way sound vanished into soil. None of that has changed. What changed was you. You learned how to place your body, how to layer yourself, how to listen without reacting. You learned when to intervene and when to let the house do its work. The Earth House never promised comfort in the way people usually mean it. It promised moderation. It slowed the cold enough for you to keep up. It softened storms until they became pressure instead of violence. It kept sound close and movement small, allowing rest to happen in fragments that eventually added up. You notice how the house feels lighter now, not because weight has lifted, but because your attention no longer strains against it. The ceiling feels close but not oppressive. The walls feel present but not enclosing. The ground supports you without demanding acknowledgement. Outside, the world has begun to reassert itself. Snow retreats in patches. Wind carries new sounds. Light reaches farther each day. The Earth House does not resist this change. It loosens quietly the same way it tightened months ago. You breathe slowly and let your thoughts drift back over the winter without trying to organize them. Fire tended, repairs made, shared warmth, long nights, short days. None of it feels dramatic now. It feels cohesive, like a season that did what seasons do. You understand now why people who slept this way spoke of it with a particular calm. Not pride, not nostalgia, just recognition. The earth held them when it needed to, then it let them go. You close your eyes again, not to sleep deeply this time, but to rest inside that understanding. Wind down. The fire is low now, more glow than flame, and the house has entered that quiet state where nothing needs immediate attention. You allow your breathing to slow, matching the stillness around you. Each inhale feels full without effort. Each exhale releases a little more weight. You do not need to think about walls or roofs or cold anymore. They have done their work. The night no longer asks anything of you. It stretches gently, offering space rather than pressure. Imagine the earth beneath you holding its temperature evenly, neither warm nor cold, just steady. Imagine the roof above you resting under a thinning layer of snowlight, filtering through in soft hints rather than sharp contrasts. The world is waking slowly, but you are not required to follow it yet. Let your thoughts become simple. The sound of breath, the sense of support beneath your body, the quiet knowledge that this place carried you through when you needed it to. There is nothing left to manage tonight. No fire to adjust, no draft to block, no storm to listen for. You're safe enough to rest fully now. If sleep comes, let it come. If it does not, that is fine too. Stillness itself is enough. The earth does not rush, neither do you. The last thing you notice is how quiet it all feels when effort disappears, how natural rest becomes when nothing is being resisted. The house remains steady. The night softens further. You drift exactly where you're meant to be. Sweet dreams.